The logistical engineering of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Yes. The logistical engineering of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Historians debate whether the Hanging Gardens were real because they treat it like a poem. As an investigator, I treat it like a structural audit. So if you look at the logistical physics of a 110-degree desert heat, the myth doesn't just hold up. It's a physical requirement for a power project of this scale. Today, we're applying the 7-in-1 method to Babylonians' hydraulic infrastructure. We aren't looking at beauty. We're looking at the military-grade engineering required to keep a mountain of flora alive in a terminal desert environment. Let's audit the flow. Section 1, the volumetric burden. So let's run the numbers. Again, let's run the numbers. To prevent flash evaporation, you aren't just sprinkling water. You are moving massive tonnage daily. So when you audit the saturated soil weighed against the structural stress on Babylon or the Babylonian brickwork, you realize this wasn't just gardening. This was a hydraulic siege. The infrastructure needed to move that river water vertically isn't a fairy tale. Again, the infrastructure needed to move that amount of river or water vertically isn't a fairy tale. It's not a fairy tale. It is a standard application of Archimedean lift or screw pump logic. So if Babylon was a superpower, this irrigation system was their central processing. Section 2, mechanical stress and logistics. The 7-in-1 method identifies the friction points. In this case, the friction point is the masonry integrity. You cannot sustain a vertical garden without a sophisticated, redundant hydraulic loop. Again, you cannot sustain a vertical garden without a sophisticated, redundant hydraulic loop. We are not talking about buckets and servants. We are talking about permanent automated pumping systems. If you find the infrastructure footprint, you find the garden. So again, if you find the infrastructure footprint, you find the gardens. They didn't disappear because they weren't a myth. Again, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon didn't disappear because they were not a myth. They disappeared because the infrastructure failed and the maintenance ceased. In other words, it was very much real. The physical evidence is in a logistical necessity. The verdict? Infrastructure is power. The Hanging Gardens existed because they had to. Again, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon existed because they had to. They were a display of state-level hydraulic dominance. The lesson for us today is simple. Every project, every asset, and every portfolio is only as strong as its hydraulic infrastructure. So if your maintenance system cannot handle the heat of the market, your system will suffer terminal evaporation. We're cataloging this under the 7-in-1 method Masterclass. Infrastructure is resilience. Audit the logic, secure the supply, and stop believing in the myth and start believing in the physics. You know, I always say this, which is so true. You know, and historians, they like to, say stuff that really doesn't make sense. I always say this, and that is, how can you say something didn't exist if you wasn't there? Just because you don't see it or you can't find the evidence doesn't mean it never existed. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon existed. Those are the facts. Audit complete.